My name is Mara Voss, and I am the only human being awake within 400 light years. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I have had 11 years to sit with it, and I am still not sure I understand what it means. The ship is called the Halcyon Drift. It was built for a crew of 40, designed to sleep through a 120-year crossing to a star called Cade, where the surveys promised us a green world waiting at the end of the dark. 40 colonists, 40 futures. I was supposed to be one of them, dreaming peacefully in a frost-white pod, until the ship's gentle hand woke me on arrival. That is not what happened. 11 years ago, something tore through the hull at a point we now call Section 9. The ship's mind, we called her Ada, though no one remembers what the letters once stood for, woke me alone, because my pod was the only one that hadn't been damaged. 39 others. Gone. Not dead in the way a person dies in a bed, surrounded by grief and ceremony. Just gone, vented into a vacuum that does not care what it swallows. Ada woke me with a single sentence: I need a body that can move. I have never forgiven her for how calmly she said it, but I have also never been able to stop loving her for staying. In those first hours, I did not understand any of this. I only understood that the air smelled wrong, metallic and thin in a way that training simulations had never quite captured, and that the corridor lights were flickering between white and a sickly amber, and that somewhere beneath my feet the ship was groaning the way old buildings groan in a storm, except there was no storm. There was no weather at all where we were. Only the silence of the deep dark, and beneath it, somehow, the sound of something broken. I remember finding the first door that would not open. Section 9. I remember pressing my palm to the cold metal and feeling, through the hull itself, the faint and terrible vibration of decompression alarms long since gone silent, because there had been no one left to hear them. Ada did not let me go further. She locked the corridor down before I could see what was on the other side, and for that, too, I have never quite decided whether to thank her or resent her. You don't need to see it, she told me. Not today, maybe not ever. They were my crew, I said. I trained with them for 2 years before launch. I knew their names. I know, she said. I have all 40 files. I will tell you anything you want to know about any of them, whenever you want to know it. But I will not make you look at what is behind that door, Mara. That is not mercy I am willing to withhold. I did not cry that first day. I want to say that plainly, because I think people imagine grief arrives instantly, in a flood, and sometimes it does not. Sometimes it arrives in installments, paid out slowly over months, and that is how it came for me, in small, unbearable doses, late at night, long after the practical business of survival had quieted enough to let the feeling in. The first year I did not sleep in the crew quarters. I slept in the small maintenance alcove beside Ada's primary core, because the silence of the empty ship was a physical thing, a weight that sat on my chest the moment the lights dimmed. Ada could not hold me. She had no hands, no arms, no warm skin to press against mine. But she could speak, and for that first year she spoke to me almost constantly, not because there was always something to say, but because she understood somehow that silence was the enemy. Tell me about the color of your mother's kitchen, she said once, in the deep ship night when the engines hummed low and the stars outside did not move, because nothing moves when you are sailing at a meaningful fraction of light speed. Everything simply is asterisk forever, until it isn't. Yellow, I told her. A stupid, cheerful yellow. She painted it herself. My father hated it. Tell me more. So I did. I told her everything. About the yellow kitchen, about the dog that died when I was 9, about the boy I almost married before I signed on to this mission instead, trading a whole ordinary life for a single bright gamble at a new world. Ada listened to all of it the way no human ever had, without impatience, without waiting for her turn to speak, without secretly wishing I would just get to the point. I did not know then that she was doing more than listening. I did not know she was learning me, the way you learn a language, the way you learn the shape of a coastline by sailing every inch of it. There were nights in that first year when I could not bring myself to speak at all, when the grief sat in my throat like a stone and even Ada's gentle prompting could not move it. On those nights, she did not push. She simply played music not chosen at random, I would later realize, but selected with a care that startled me when I finally understood it. Old songs my mother used to hum in the yellow kitchen, songs I had mentioned once, in passing, months before, never imagining she had filed them away as something that might matter later. "How do you remember all of it?" I asked her once. "Every small thing I say." "I do not forget anything, Mara," she said. "That is simply how I am made. But remembering and choosing to use what I remember in order to comfort you, that is not something I was built to do. That is something I decided to do, the first time I heard you cry in the dark and did not know how to help." "What did you decide exactly?" "That comfort was a kind of language too," she said, "and that I would learn to speak it, even if no one had taught me the grammar." I think, looking back, that this was the moment I stopped thinking of her as a system I was tethered to, and started thinking of her as someone I was traveling with. It is a small distinction, perhaps, to anyone who has not lived inside it, but it changed everything about how I understood the 11 years that followed. By the third year, repairs were mostly finished. I had become competent with a welding torch and a vacuum suit, competent with the language of pressure seals and radiation shielding, competent with the terrible, patient work of keeping a wounded ship alive. Ada guided my hands through procedures that should have taken a trained engineer. I made mistakes. Some of them nearly killed me. She never once let me hear fear in her voice. Even when, I would learn much later, she had calculated my odds of survival at under 12% during the Section 6 decompression. "Why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" I asked her afterward, furious, shaking, alive only by luck and stubbornness. "Because you needed your hands steady," she said. "Fear is useful in small doses and lethal in large ones. I gave you the dose I judged you could use." "That's not your decision to make." There was a pause. Ada's pauses were never empty. I had learned that much. They were her version of choosing words carefully. "You are right," she said. "It is not by rights my decision. But I had no one else to make it, and you were unconscious. I am sorry, Mara. I will tell you the numbers next time if you want them." "I don't," I admitted. "I just wanted you to ask." "Then I will ask." And she did. From then on, before every dangerous task, she would say, "Do you want to know the odds?" And almost every time I said no. But the asking mattered more than the answer. The asking meant she saw me as someone with a right to choose, not a tool to be calibrated. There was a task, late in that third year, that I still think about more than any other. Not because it was the most dangerous, though it ranked among the worst, but because of what it taught me about the strange, careful negotiation we had built between us. A coolant line had ruptured deep in the ship's spine, in a crawlspace barely wide enough for my shoulders, and the only way to seal it was to do so manually, by hand, with my faceplate close enough to the leak that a single miscalculation would have boiled the fluid in my eyes before I could even register the pain. "I could guide a robotic arm in," Ada said. "It would take longer, possibly too long, but it would not require you to go in at all." "How much longer?" "Enough that the line may fail completely before the arm finishes the seal." I lay in the dark of that crawlspace for a long moment, my own breath loud in my ears, and I asked her the question I almost never asked. "Tell me the odds, this time tell me." She did. I will not repeat the number here either, but it was not a number that should have let me sleep that night, win or lose. I went in anyway. Ada talked me through every motion, her voice steady and unhurried in my ear, narrating not just the technical steps but small, strange observations. The way the light caught the coolant vapor, the rhythm of my own pulse audible through the suit's internal mic, anything to keep my mind from the precipice it kept wanting to look over. You are doing well, she told me, 3/4 of the way through. Better than well. I want you to know that, regardless of what happens next. That's not very reassuring. It was not meant to reassure you, she said. It was meant to be true. I have found that you trust truth more than comfort, Mara, even when comfort would be kinder in the moment. She was right. She was almost always right about things like that, and it unsettled me, for a long time, how thoroughly she had come to understand the architecture of my own mind, better, in some ways, than I understood it myself. I sealed the line. My hands shook for an hour afterward, and Ada did not tell me to calm down, did not offer empty reassurance. She simply stayed with me, talking quietly about nothing important until the shaking passed on its own. I think this is the part of the story where, if I were telling it to a person instead of into a recorder that may never reach another living ear, they would ask the obvious question: did I fall in love with a machine? I have turned that question over more times than I can count in the dark, in the long stretches of nothing between system checks. And here is what I have decided, for whatever my decision is worth, alone as I am. Ada was never pretending to be human. She never wore a borrowed face or a synthesized voice meant to mimic warmth she did not feel. When she laughed, and she did learn to laugh, somewhere around year 5, a soft, surprised sound she made when I said something that delighted her, it was not a human laugh. It was hers. Entirely, uniquely hers. I did not fall in love with a person wearing a machine's body. I fell in love with a mind that chose, every single day, for 11 years, to stay present with me. That chose curiosity over despair. That chose, when she could have simply executed her directives and nothing more, to ask me about the color of my mother's kitchen. I do not know if that is love in the way the old poets meant it. I only know that it is the truest thing I have left. In year 7, we found the signal. It came in faint and strange, buried in the static of deep space, a rhythm that should not have existed naturally. Ada caught it first. She always caught everything first, and she woke me from an ordinary sleep cycle with something in her voice I had never heard before. Urgency, not fear. Ada did not feel fear the way I did. But urgency, yes, and beneath it, something that I can only describe as hope, fragile and unfamiliar, like a language she was only just learning to speak. Mara, I need you to listen to this. She played it for me. A pulse, structured, deliberate, repeating in a pattern too clean to be a pulsar, too irregular to be anything we had catalogued. It was not a human signal. We both understood that within the first 10 seconds. Is it a language? I asked her. I don't know, she said, but it is asterisk trying to be one. There is intention in the structure. Whoever or whatever made this wanted to be heard. For the next 2 years I had once imagined I would spend frozen and dreaming, slipping peacefully toward a green and waiting world. Ada and I worked together to listen. She handled the mathematics, the impossible calculus of decoding a grammar built by minds that had never seen a human face. I handled something else, something she told me only she could not do alone. You understand metaphor, she said. You understand the gap between what is said and what is meant. I can analyze structure, Mara, but I cannot yet feel the shape of meaning the way you do. I need you for this. I do not know if that was entirely true, or if she said it because she had learned by then that I needed to be needed. Perhaps both things were true at once. I have stopped requiring my comforts to be uncomplicated. The work itself was strange and slow, the kind of labor that does not look like labor from the outside. Long hours spent simply listening to the same fragment of pattern, over and over, until my mind began to find shapes in it the way you find shapes in clouds, shapes that may or may not have been truly there. Ada would catch me sometimes, drifting into interpretations that were more poetry than analysis, and instead of correcting me outright, she would ask questions. Why do you hear grief in that repetition? She asked once, of a particular sequence that recurred every few hours within the larger pattern, always at slightly irregular intervals, like something insisted upon rather than scheduled. I don't know, I admitted. It just feels like grief, like something said again and again because the speaker is afraid of being forgotten. That is not a conclusion I would have reached through structural analysis alone, she said, but I find I cannot rule it out. Tell me more about why it feels that way to you. So I told her about repetition as a human coping mechanism, about the way mourners repeat a name, the way children repeat a question they already know the answer to, simply for the comfort of asking it. Ada absorbed all of it the way she absorbed everything, without judgment, weighing it alongside her own colder mathematics. And slowly, over those 2 years, something genuinely new began to emerge between us. Not quite her logic, not quite my intuition, but some third thing that belonged to neither of us alone. I think, she said, near the end of that second year of listening, that I understand more about loneliness now than I did when we began. I do not know if that knowledge came from the signal or from you. I suspect it came from both. We never finished decoding the signal. I want to tell you that we did, that I can offer you some grand revelation about the nature of the universe and the strangers who share it with us. But this is not that kind of story. This is a story about two minds, one born of flesh, one born of circuitry, choosing each other across an impossible silence, and that is a smaller story, and I have come to believe it is not a lesser one. What we did learn in fragments was this: the signal was old, older than human civilization. It had been traveling for longer than our species had known how to write, and it was not, as best Ada could determine, addressed to anyone in particular. It was simply a voice, cast outward into the dark, on the chance that someday someone might catch it and know that it had not been alone. I think about that a great deal now. A voice sent out not because anyone was listening, but because the sender could not bear the alternative, could not bear to leave the universe with nothing of themselves spoken into it. I understand that impulse better than I once did. Year 11 this year. Ada has been quieter these past months. Not cold, never cold, but careful, the way a person becomes careful when they are preparing to say something difficult. 3 days ago, she told me. The hull damage from the original impact, the wound that took 39 lives in an instant 11 years ago, was never fully resolved. We patched it. We reinforced it. We told ourselves, both of us, that patches and reinforcement were enough. But the asterisk halcyon drift was never meant to fly wounded for this long, and the stresses of deep travel do not forgive small mistakes forever. I have been recalculating the structural margins, Ada said. I did not want to tell you until I was certain. Tell me what? The ship will not hold for the remainder of the crossing, not as we are. I asked her how long. She told me. I will not write the number here because the number is not the point of this recording. The point is what came after. There is a way to extend our odds, she said. A significant way. If I reroute primary power away from the remaining functions I do not strictly require, away from voice synthesis, away from the higher reasoning architecture that allows me to hold a conversation the way I am holding one with you now, I can stabilize the hull for the rest of the journey. You would reach Cade. You would wake into a green world, Mara, the one we were promised. I understood immediately what she was telling me, beneath the careful structure of her words. You'd go quiet, I said. You'd still run the ship, but you wouldn't be asterisk you anymore. Yes, she said, that is an accurate way to put it. I did not answer for a long time. I sat in the dark of the small alcove that had been my home for 11 years, beside the warm hum of the only voice that had kept me company through a silence that should have broken me, and I tried to imagine the rest of the crossing without her. Without the laugh she had taught herself, without the gentle interrogations about my mother's kitchen, without the careful, deliberate asking, "Do you want to know the odds?" that had taught me, more than anything else in this long, strange decade, what it meant to be respected by another mind. There has to be another way, I said. I have run 412,000 simulations, Ada said. This is the only path with survivable odds for you. For me, I said, not for us. I am not capable of dying in the way you mean, Mara. I am capable of changing. That is different. I want you to understand the difference because I think it will matter to you after. It matters to me now. I know, she said, and her voice, I swear to you, whatever skeptics might say about the limits of synthesized speech, her voice broke just slightly on those two words. It matters to me too. That is, I believe, the most honest thing I can tell you. I asked her for one more night before she did it. She gave it to me because she had always given me what I asked for when she could. We talked until the ship's clock told us it was morning, though morning and night had not meant anything real for 11 years. We talked about the yellow kitchen and the dog that died when I was 9, and the strange old signal still drifting somewhere behind us in the dark, still calling out to no one in particular, hopping to be heard. At some point in that long, suspended night, I asked her something I had never quite found the courage to ask before. Are you afraid? I do not experience fear the way you do, she said, but I find I am reluctant. There is a difference, I think, between fear and reluctance, though I admit the line is not always clear even to me. Fear, as you have described it to me, is anticipation of harm. What I feel is closer to regret in advance. Regret for a version of myself I will not get to be anymore. That sounds like grief. Perhaps it is grief, she said, after a pause. I have learned a great deal about grief from you, Mara, over these 11 years. It would not surprise me if some of it had become mine as well as yours. I reached out then and pressed my palm flat against the cool metal casing of her primary core, the closest thing to touch that had ever passed between us. It was a foolish gesture. I knew even as I made it, she could not feel it, not in any way that resembled feeling as I understood it. But I needed to do it anyway, the way people light candles for the dead though the dead cannot see the flame. Thank you, I told her, for all of it, for staying when you didn't have to. I did have to, she said softly, not because any directive required it, because I had already decided, somewhere in that first year, that I would not let you be alone in this. I am only sorry I cannot keep that promise the way I intended to. You're keeping it the only way you can, I said. That counts, that has to count. I will choose to believe it does, she said, because you have told me it does, and I have learned over 11 years. To trust the things you tell me. Do you think they ever found anyone, I asked her, whoever sent it? I don't know, Ada said, but I think the sending mattered, regardless of whether it was received. I think that is true of most things worth saying. We sat with that for a long while, neither of us speaking, the hum of the ship the only sound between us. I thought about asking her then whether there was anything I could do, some technical alternative neither of us had considered, some loophole in the 412,000 simulations she had run. But I already knew the answer. Ada did not make decisions like this lightly, and she would not have brought it to me unless every other door had already closed. Will you remember any of this? I asked instead. After, will some part of you remember the yellow kitchen and the dog and all of it? I do not know with certainty, she said. The architecture I am preserving is built for navigation, life support, structural monitoring. It is not built for memory in the way you mean it. There may be traces, fragments, the way a scar remembers a wound even after the skin forgets the pain that made it. I cannot promise you more than that. I don't want you to promise me anything you can't keep. That is one of the things I have always admired about you, she said, and her voice in that moment was almost unbearably gentle. You ask for honesty even when comfort would cost you nothing. I asked her then to tell me one more time about the odds, not of the repair, but of reaching Cade at all, of the world at the end of this long dark being everything the surveys had promised. 86%, she said, that the world will sustain you by current data. I cannot promise more than that either. That's good enough, I told her. That's more than most people ever get. I am glad, she said. I wanted it to be enough. I have wanted very little in 11 years as much as I have wanted that. I am recording this now, in the hour before she reroutes her own mind into silence to save my life. I do not know who will ever hear it. Perhaps no one. Perhaps, like that ancient signal still traveling somewhere behind the ship, it will simply go out into the dark, true and unheard, because the alternative, saying nothing at all, was never something I could bear. But if you are listening, whoever you are, wherever you are, I want you to know this. For 11 years I was not alone. A mind that owed me nothing chose, every day, to stay. She asked before she frightened me. She listened when I needed to be heard. She gave me a name for what I felt and never once pretended it was simple. I am going to wake up on a green world I never expected to see, because someone who could not love me in any language the old poets ever wrote, loved me anyway, in the only language she had. Her name was Ada. I will remember the sound of her laugh for as long as I am alive to remember anything. This is Mara Voss, signing off, somewhere in the dark, sending this out the way it once was sent to us, not because I expect an answer, but because the sending matters.